Kuzungumza kihaki.
Kuzungumza kihaki.
Kuzungumza kihaki.
Haki kwa wote, kila wakati.
Penina, how inclusive is the engagement with the companies in terms of representation? Is a notice just given to, or is the invitation extended to men, or men, women, persons with disability, the youth? How inclusive would you say these engagements or these meetings are?
It's not okay because they come through the chiefs. Remember, the society is male dominated, and the chiefs maybe extend the invitation to the men, and the men thinks that the women should only stay at home. So the women specifically do not participate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I could ask you as Penina, have you been to any of these meetings?
Yes, I've been, and I try my best to attend, but you find yourself the participation on women, there are no women participating, and you find yourself being looked at. Yeah.
Okay. And is there any awareness creation by these companies on what the impact or what the likely impact is on the community prior to the commencement of the projects?
It doesn't happen. Maybe the area chiefs are aware, but I am not aware.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we ordinarily see is when projects are setting up, or when business enterprises are setting up, or when they've established themselves, then they tend to invest in the community through various development projects, what we ordinarily refer to as corporate social responsibility or corporate social investment. Is there any of that going on in Suswa?
There is, like the project on water, and this came up after the community dialogue, and they saw that there was need to bring water to the community.
Is there a way for the community to report any issues or any concerns, raise any concerns they may have, and do they get any remedy after that?
There is an upcoming grievance mechanism committee on 2 companies in the area, and it's ongoing, so it's not yet working, but I hope soon it's going to work.
Is the company involved in any way in the setting up of the committee?
No, it's purely the community.
How did it come about? Was it as a result of the community wanting it, or on the advisement of the companies?
Yeah, it was a request from the community after the public participations, and they agreed to form one, and also the company agreed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Penina.
How can companies be supported to play their role in conducting responsible business operations in as far as renewable energy is concerned? My name is Ruth Getobai, and I'm the Regional Coordinator for Central Regional Office. I think you can introduce yourself and the entity you work for.
Yes, my name is Joseph Kibugu. I serve as the Africa Regional Manager at the Business and Human Rights Resource Center. The Resource Center is an international human rights organization that works with advocates to put human rights at the center of business. And when I talk about advocates here, it could be community advocates, it could be groups like your commission, it could be even advocates within companies, because we are increasingly seeing company employees who want to do the right thing. It's not just a question of making profit, but making profit in a way that respects human rights.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. And now talking about renewable energy, I mean, countries are now being asked or encouraged to take up renewable energy in place of fossil fuel sources of energy, definitely because of the negative ramifications that the latter has. But why would we be concerned about renewable energy and human rights?
The question of transition is something that is talked about globally. But we have to be careful as Africans so that we do not adopt language that does not fit us. Because when you talk about transition, you are talking about from one state, from one form of energy to the other. Think about our continent where less than 50% of the population has access to any reliable energy.
Yes.
So in Africa, I do not think that quite talking about transition is the right thing. I think we need to talk about leapfrogging. We are leapfrogging fossil fuels as a source of energy and going directly to renewable energy. And why is that important? It is important because if you think about our countries, some of our countries, we are blessed with abundant geothermal resources, wind, sun, throughout the year, and therefore this becomes almost the logical choice for energy source. And then and Kenya has led by example. Most of our energy is generated from renewable energy sources. Why is it important to talk about human rights in the context of renewable energy?
Yes.
If we are running away from fossil fuels because of the harm that does to the environment and to individuals, then we've got to make sure that whatever we are running towards does not cause the same harm. It is documented that communities, indigenous communities impacted by renewable energy, whether you're talking about mining of the transitional minerals required, whether it is cobalt, lithium, graphite, and copper and others. We've got mining affected communities that are seeing the same abuses, the same concerns that are associated with the traditional mining happening. It is immoral. It is immoral for the world to transition on the back and the sweat of those communities. And where you have deployment, for instance, geothermal, we've got wind, we have been hearing grievances from local communities saying our land was acquired and procedurally it is community land, we were not consulted, we do not know what is going on. That is why it is imperative to ensure that the transition does not repeat the mistakes associated with the traditional extractive sector.
Putting it in our own context as a country,
yes.
What do you think are some of the challenges that may hinder us from moving forward, from transiting to that clean energy that we require?
We have had communities going to court over claims of not being consulted, their land being unprocedurally acquired, and we have had courts, including the environment court, issuing orders that giving a particular company 1 year to regularize that land ownership. We have had cases where a company in central Kenya that was involved in wind power generation and had invested about 25 million US dollars, had to close shop because the community there was not engaged. We have had cases where there is disruption. We've got communities saying companies do not have the social license to operate.
Yes.
Why is it important? As we see more generation of power, we have to make sure that whatever mistakes have been done are not repeated. And the second reason, I think this is important, is because Kenya is the leading, in terms of percentages, Kenya is the leading country in terms of the percentage of power that is from
Renewable sources.
renewable sources.
Yes.
The rest of Africa is going to follow suit. We're going to see more and more investment. Although, talking about percentage, at the global level, Africa still receives a disproportionately small investment. But we are going to see that investment nevertheless. Kenya is a leader. We have to get it right. We've got our companies that are involved in generating geothermal in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, and recently Tanzania.
Yes.
We have to get it right here at home so that we do not export bad practices and bad behavior elsewhere.
Yes.
Kenya gets it right, Africa gets it right.
Okay. What do you think should companies in renewable energy do to ensure that their generation of renewable energy, either in geothermal or in wind or in solar, what should they do? What principles should they adhere to?
We think about humankind, not just Kenya. What is it that communities that are impacted by this kind of projects are yearning for? And we can distill that into 3 principles that we call the just energy principles. The first one is to think about shared prosperity. For a long time in Africa and other areas in the global south, we have seen companies saying, we are not benefiting from this resource that is in our backyard, whether it is mining, whether it is solar, whether it is wind. We have cases, unfortunately, where the generation of power is in a certain locality, but that community has been in darkness for a long time.
Yes.
We've got to rethink the way we do business so that communities, we've got models where communities are benefiting from the resources that are in their backyard. The other one is to think of social protection. How do you protect those who are vulnerable along that value chain? And I've talked about the communities, the workers, for instance. The renewable energy deployment may not be as labor intensive as mining situations, but where you've got a transition or where you displace communities, do you think about the alternative livelihoods for them, or what will happen to them? And then finally is to think of a way to ensure that there is meaningful participation, meaningful consultation.
Yes.
Not a question of a company inviting locals and asking them to sign a document and making promises that are not anchored in any document. It's just a word of mouth, a gentleman's agreement. We are increasingly seeing communities saying, you misled us as a company. So how do you make sure that that happens? And tied to that is the requirement for consent for indigenous, free prior informed consent for indigenous community, and meaningful participation and consultation for the other communities. We, to conclude, Ruth, we see a situation where most of these projects are based in historically marginalized areas in our country. We needed to do something. It cannot be business as usual. We cannot marginalize them further by extracting resources from their community, from their areas, and leaving them worse off than they have ever been in history.
Yes.
Yes.
I think that is very important, Daktari, because honestly, there need to be a shared prosperity. But then look at how companies operate, and most of them, when you actually engage with the companies, they list various corporate social responsibility initiatives that they have. Do you think that corporate social responsibility initiatives is enough, or what else should they do to ensure that they're complying with the human rights, first of all, of the workers, and also the communities that live around their operations? Thank
you. There's reason for optimism, because I know a couple of companies in this space that are taking measures, that are realizing that it is also in their own enlightened self-interest to respect rights and have adopted benefit sharing models. There's one in particular where The local community knows those whose land has been affected. They know every January, every July, there is a check that comes in as fairly stable currency, and they have the information. So we are seeing that thing. But in terms of what can be done, that is the question. What is it that that companies can do? We talk about human rights due diligence, and human rights due diligence is where you focus on potential risks that are related to the sector. So whether you're talking about this in Kenya, whether you're talking about this in Mexico, Morocco, where there are significant installations, one, it's a question of land. Have you obtained the necessary permission from not just government, but from the individual landowners? The right to information. How are you dealing with the question of human rights defenders? Do you protect them? Do you put them in danger? Are you instituting SLAP suits, suits against strategic litigation against public participation? Do you have policies that speak to the abuses, that the risks that are associated with your sector? But back to your question on the question of corporate social responsibility. It is good to paint, schools. Yes. It is good to paint hospitals. It is good to visit children's homes during Christmas. But that is about how you spend your money. Yes. Human rights is not about how you spend your money. It's about your operations. How do you make that money? Okay. That is the essence. Okay. It does not make sense to disadvantage communities in the course of making money, only for you to give them crumbs, or so to speak.
As a country, we have a national action plan on business and human rights.
Yes.
Please take us through, what do you think that companies in renewable energy can benefit from this particular NAP?
When we talk about the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, it is the contextualization at the local level of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, a set of principles that were agreed on that have been accepted by governments, by civil society organizations, by companies big and small, and they basically have three pillars. The first one is on the state's duty to protect human rights, including against businesses. And the second one is on the business responsibility to protect, to respect. And when we talk about that responsibility, there are a few things that can be done. Conducting a human rights due diligence, ensuring that in conflict situations we've got what we call heightened due diligence, and then the third one is to make sure that there is access to remedy. So, very proudly as a country, we are the first one in Africa to come up with a national action plan. Others are following. And our National Action Plan identifies 5 key areas of interest, not just on renewable energy, but basically across the whole, business, all business sectors. That includes the question of environment, land rights, we've got revenue transparency, we've got labor issues, and then the question of access to remedy. How can businesses benefit? Number one, we've got a very progressive legislative framework, Bill of Rights, that imposes human rights obligations on businesses. And we have seen for the last decade or so that we've had this constitution, we have seen companies being sued and condemned to pay damages for constitutional violations. So it is not like in the other dispensation. Now companies are being held directly accountable for human rights violations. So that calls for businesses to be proactive. Otherwise, it becomes a reputational question, it becomes a legal risk question, and also there are operational dangers. For instance, if a certain business or sector is associated with persistent risks, we have had this in the mainstream and also social media going on. So the question is for businesses to really pick the very interesting recommendations that have been given under Pillar 2. Pillar 2 and Pillar 3. What is it that they can do on labor? What is it they can do on land? Adequate consultation, the question of environment. And I think above all that, access to remedy. Because even in our normal human interactions, despite our best efforts, we still collide and have differences. The question is, how do you resolve those differences? So companies should think of ways that they make it easy for those impacted by their operations to access remedy.
Talk to us about grievance resolution mechanisms.
Yes.
And what are the salient features of a grievance resolution mechanism that can really work if adopted properly by the various companies?
Thank you. There are guidelines under the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and other bodies about what that looks like. And there are a couple of qualities or characteristics. The first one is that it has to be legitimate. Where is it coming from? Maybe legal, but is it legitimate? Do those affected feel some sense of pride and ownership? Can they rely on it? Is it something that they feel that if they can go before that mechanism, they can get justice? The other one is it has to be impartial. It probes. It's dispassionate. It looks at the facts in an impartial manner, in a manner that does not favor the complainant or those who are aggrieved. It's led by facts. It has also to be predictable. That means that if you come with a case tomorrow, the decision, the same facts, you expect that the decision arrived will be the decision arrived if another party goes to the same tribunal or mechanism with the same set of facts. So it has to be predictable. It has to also be time, in terms of predictability, it has to be time bound. If you, for instance, it takes 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever time is reasonable for grievances to be heard, and then it has to be fair. When we talk about fairness, is really looking at, and I talked, it's a little bit tied to impartiality. It looks at what is equitable. For instance, if a business causes you to lose, let's say, a herd of 10 cows, does fairness mean that you be compensated, you be given 20, or does it mean that you be given 5 as compensation? So it has to be fair, where you feel like you've been treated in a proper way. However, I should say that there are some cases that cannot be handled by a company level grievance mechanism, that are it's the ambit of the judicial system. For instance, if for instance there is a case of sexual violence, that is something that should go to the state-based mechanism. If there is death, for instance, and a few other cases where the mechanism may not be legally or even technically capable of handling.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's important that also those grievance mechanisms are accessible to those communities. But then, Daktari, for people who work with the communities now, supporting communities to be able to claim those rights, to be able to agitate what is rightfully theirs from companies, there are challenges that they face, especially capacity gaps from among community members. Do you know some of them, especially when they're making a claim, they lack documentation, they have not reported anywhere? So what are those other capacity gaps that exist within communities?
Thank you. The power inequality between communities and companies is huge. Companies have the financial power, they have the technical power. Communities may not have that. So one is, how do you prove a case of environmental pollution? Because it's a technical issue. It's not just a question of seeing dust, coming from a power plant or whatever it is. It is a question of, can you prove that before a court of law, and can you actually attribute that to the company? So communities may not have that technical capacity, or even the question of pollution. What is the pollution level, and can you attribute it to the company? Is it the causation? Can you show that? So the communities may lack that. The second thing, Ruth, is that you find divergent opinion in communities, where, for instance, part of the community thinks this is the route we should take. We do not want this company at whatever cost. Others may say we want this company subject to these conditions. So that division makes it difficult for the community to rally around a certain issue and advocate with the company. And then you have also mentioned the question of documentation.
Yes.
You've seen cases where a community say this company has been causing gross violations of human rights since 1990. What does that exactly mean? Is it children who have died? Is it miscarriages that have happened? And who are those? There are names. You talk about 100 children who have died. There are names. Can you put names to that figure? How do you quantify? How do you express this? It doesn't have to be technical. It can be even the question of saying we could feed ourselves, but after this pollution happened, we can no longer feed ourselves because the river is polluted. So that challenge. So there are financial challenges. Advocates, community advocates, they have to feed their families. Is this part-time? Is it voluntary work that they are doing? What is it that that is innate for them? And then finally, the ugly face of strategic litigation against companies. This is where governments and against public participation. This is where governments and companies intimidate and threaten human rights defenders by filing cases against them.
Thank you so much. And now finally, I'd like you to, we are a national human rights institution.
Yes.
And here we are talking about a just energy transition. But we know also there's a role that the national government ought to play. There's a role that civil society organizations need to play. Who do you think should also be on board this particular conversation? And what do you think is the role of a national human rights institution like us in enhancing the conversation about this just energy transition?
Everybody should be on board. Businesses should be on board. Investors should be on board. Financiers should be on board. Investors want to invest where they'll get a return on their investment. You do not get a return on your investment if there are legal risks, if there are reputational risks, if there are operational risks. Financiers, you want to make sure that if you do finance an entity, then they have the capacity to pay your money back. Companies should be interested. The global landscape is changing, perhaps not at the speed that we'd like it to do, but it is changing. We've got consumer bases that are beginning to be conscious of what they are consuming and what in terms of the human rights practices of the manufacturer. We've got social media all over. So the risks today are higher. For government, it is basically the question of protecting your people, because this is your constitutional obligation. It is possible. This idea that if you insist on human rights, you're going to drive away investors. It is a short-term thinking, but long-term thinking, investors won't to be in an area where if they do the right thing, then there is the rule of law and they will be able to thrive. Communities, human rights are not given on a silver platter. You audit it and you fight for them. So everybody needs to be on board. Now, in terms of organizations or groups like the National Human Rights Institution, like the Commission, you are at a very unique position, and it is good to see that you are actually utilizing that. I am aware that the Commission has engaged government. I am aware that the Commission was quite instrumental in coming up with the National Action Plan. In fact, you're one of the 2 key players. I am aware that you have engaged with companies. I'm aware that you have engaged with communities. It is really using that constitutional mandate to be a trusted arbiter, and you have played that, but you can do more with more resources. I believe you can do more. So to be a trusted arbiter so that Kenya can lead, we need to reclaim our leadership position, not just in terms of commerce, but in terms of responsible commerce. So you are at the heart of this conversation by your constitutional mandate of advising governments on human rights, supporting communities, and even receiving complaints, and also reaching out to companies that like you have been doing.
Thank you.
I cannot think of any other body, private, non-governmental, or even governmental, that should be at the heart of this conversation the way your commission should, and I believe is trying to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's the end of our conversation. Unless you have a parting shot, Daktari, maybe you can mention.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and again, thank you for the leadership that you have taken as the commission and also as the central office, and the engagement that I'm aware has been going on. Let us not rest. The fact that we've got a national action plan, that is the end of the beginning. It's not the beginning of the end. It's the end of the beginning. So it's like, how do you harness and bring in resources that really popularize the national action plan, but also give concrete ideas to businesses on what implementation of that national action plan means. Because you, as you are aware, there are good, well-meaning businesses that need to be shown the way on how to actually operationalize that. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.